they made her ring a bell.
Yeah. You should sue Louisiana.
Exactly. That's what I was saying, because my sister's a dietitian, and she's like, this is just ridiculous care. And then she was talking to like one of the surgeons or something, or not surgeons, one of the people dealing with his like nutrition or whatever. And he said something that just wasn't true. I don't know what it was. It was above me. And then my sister was just like, that's just not true. And he was like saying all this jargon to make it sound like it was.
It's just because like it's like a superpower of mine. It's so crazy when you hear a medical doctor say something and you're like, I don't know enough to know why you're making something up right now, but I feel like you're covering something.
Yep.
Like you're hiding something or you're omitting something in this conversation.
And it is messed up because it's like if you you're trying to take advantage of somebody.
If you ask them like, hey, I'm good. What is that in there?
That water does look cool.
I have water, but it's like fancy water.
Yeah, I almost won it just because it looks cool, but no, it's fine. I don't want to waste water.
They're like in metal cans.
Oh, so my excuse to not reuse it is invalid now.
I'm good.
Okay,
we're recording. You guys can start right now.
You have an analogy to start?
Oh, yeah. Well, everybody, Dr. Jacob Ambrose here, and we got Dr. Vincent Barbieri. This is episode 7 of ADHD, Attention Deficit Attention.
I knew you'd fuck it up. Oh, I was
Dang
waiting
it.
for this.
ADHD moment.
Attention Deficit
Hyperactivity Disorder. So we're going to be talking about that. And then, we're doing our thing, private practice. One of the things I want to point out is that we got a lot of requests from people to talk about certain topics. So at the end of the episode, a little incentive to stick around, we'll talk about those specific questions. And so just to also say we are listening. So
and if you at some point in the next 2 hours, we will provide a code that if you enter, you will win $100.
$100 million. So stay tuned.
Stick around. It might be
if
at
you
any
leave
time.
50 comments, then you'll get like an extra bag of chips.
First comment, that's $100.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to start off with an analogy to give people an idea of like, what does ADHD feel like to people with ADHD? And I like to start with, well, what's the worst part of ADHD? And a lot of people at face value will think, well, it's the symptoms, it's the hyperfocus, it's the impulsivity, it's forgetting things that are important. But from what I've witnessed and experienced, the worst part of ADHD is what happens after the symptoms. It's when all the dust settles and you realize and you look left and right and you've left behind everybody that you've cared about, all your loved ones and things important to you. And just to really embody that analogy, I want to do a brief activity with whoever's watching, but take a moment to close your eyes and notice your surroundings.
I'm in a podcast studio.
In a podcast studio, notice what you hear. For some people, it might be the sound of your AC unit. Maybe it's the sound of a refrigerator. Anything that you notice in this moment. Notice that you probably weren't paying attention to that before I asked you to do that. Because that's very healthy. We have an ability to habituate sounds that aren't important in the given moment. For ADHD, imagine that, but the refrigerator noise is your relationship with your daughter. Or the AC noise is your deep, needed quality time with your wife. It's like with ADHD, there's this unhealthy habituation that happens where you slowly start to rule out the things that are important to you because there's something more novel in front of you. So with ADHD, it's also true that one of the worst aspects of it is that the people that care about you most can sometimes feel unwanted and unappreciated because you're sitting down watching the football game or something, or you're working on something, and it's like low priority but novel in the moment. And then your high priority wife enters the room who cares about you and loves you, and you feel like there's no stimulation coming from her at all because she's been there for you over and over and over again. But a good message for people that love people with ADHD and people who have ADHD is that if a meteor was coming to strike your wife down in that moment, you would break that TV in half and throw it at the meteor because you know how much more of a priority your wife is. But the problem with ADHD is that you over pay attention to what's novel and less important, and you ignore sometimes what's less novel and most important. Your value system does not align with your priority system. And that's one of the biggest takeaways that I like to give people with ADHD.
Oh, you're just going into like the deep cut immediately.
Yeah. I figured.
I was like, that's like hour 2 conversation.
Yeah, I'm just jumping into it, man.
Well, I feel like what you're getting at too is like part of, so like just for the framework of like ADHD, you know, if you were a clinical psychologist like us, we would either define you, if you had ADHD, as someone with a predominantly inattentive ADHD, meaning your attention is more dysregulated and it's much more impacted on that end, or hyperactive, which is kind of like the classic understanding of ADHD back when it was more studied in boys. It more kind of presented as someone who couldn't sit still. But you're kind of and you know there, and then there's a combined presentation where someone has, you know, some of both symptoms of, and in a lot of ways kind of they bleed into each other. So splitting hairs of, you know, it's this or that. But attention is clearly a big factor, and you're talking about the ways in which your attention is dysregulated and how it influences relationships.
Certainly. And I think that's a good way to kind of kick it off too, to give people like some footing to stand on. But what are the different types of ADHD and what do the symptoms look like? I mean, I liked what you did with the narcissism episode. Like we just kind of started going back and forth and listing them out. But with the inattention type, there's of course sometimes some overlap because it can be combined with the hyperactive type. But starting with inattention, I think one of the big symptoms is time blindness, right? You could be working on something, you don't even realize that you haven't eaten in like 8 hours. Probably that's a little extreme, but
not for some people.
Not
for lots of people, honestly.
Yeah, that's actually true. Yeah, some people will just go dive into it. But yeah, time blindness is huge, right?
Time blindness, memory issues, and specifically like working memory, that memory in that 10 to 30 second range. So, well, I mean, at least what I've noticed with people with problems with inattention ADHD is their ability to hold information in their brain for 0 to 30 seconds is very much impaired. And by that I mean, like, if I ask someone, hey, can you do this thing in a minute, right? Like, can you go put the tea on the kettle in a minute? They will forget. And in a lot of ways, it's because their ability to retain information in their head in that kind of 10 to 30 second range, it's a very leaky kind of experience.
Yeah, I love that you brought up working memory because that's been like fresh on my mind, like as I was thinking about the episode. But it's so true because people with ADHD get called out for talking a whole lot. And I think one of the reasons that people with ADHD talk so much is not because they're trying to just have a captive audience, but it's because they need a captive audience to get everything out. It's like you launch yourself into a point and then midway you lose your point, but you've been in that spot a whole lot with inattention with ADHD and you know that it's going to come. And if you hold on a little longer, it'll pop up. And then you're like, okay. Then you start talking about it. Mm-hmm. So I think a lot of times with working memory issues, you have to really lay out all the details, pause, capture your thought and lay it out again. And then some people can feel like, well, why am I just captive audience? Why can't you just pause and stop when you're done? you know?
And then that's one example of the ways in which people with ADHD compensate for their impairments. Like ADHD, the difference between ADHD and the other stuff we've talked about so far, like anxiety and depression, that is more on the mental, psychological side of the spectrum of disorders. Personality disorders, kind of like in the middle, where they're a little bit more genetic, a little bit more ingrained in every part of your life. But then when you go to the neurodevelopmental disorders, which is kind of like, for instance, schizophrenia or ADHD, there's such a physiological difference. Your brain is different. Your neurotransmitters are at different levels. There's a chemical and biological difference in the way your brain is made up. And so a lot of the ways in which it influences you are much more on the neuropsychological side, like processing things. Like it's going to show up in the way you learn. And someone with like social anxiety, that might not be the case. So it's like it's such a structural thing.
Yeah, I mean that's it's crazy because that's exactly like what's flowing through my mind right now as you speak. I'm like, we just prepared in the same way, but like
I'm stealing your stuff.
I'm stealing your stuff. That yeah, no, like you can't treat ADHD the same way you would treat anxiety, and yet it happens all the time. Like with ADHD, you have a hard time with working memory, like you said, and with anxiety, it's like you over prepare. So if you have this issue, if a client walks into your office and they're really just writing down notes like crazy, your first thought is going to be, this is just an over preparation. But it's not an over preparation, it's an overcompensation for a real disability. It's like you could be a student in gym class and you're getting ready for a pole vault and you have a sprained ankle. Like everybody's going to say, well, it would make sense if you're afraid to try the pole vault because you have a real physical condition. But with ADHD, it's invisible and nobody really picks up on that. And they're like, why are you nervous? You should be able to retain this information. You don't need a notebook, or you don't need to check your environment 5 times before you leave. But that's a real experience for the person with ADHD because they also have real experiences of their mind betraying them by not picking up on details. So you look around 5 times before you leave your office or stuff like that.
That was so well said. Like their mind betraying them, and yeah, like you said, people with ADHD are going to overcompensate in many ways for the impacts their disorder has on their ability to retain information. Like a very common thing I've noticed with people with ADHD is if they get an assignment in school and maybe the assignment really takes like 3 days if you cram, they're not going to wait till 3 days before because they don't have the ability to cram. Like they need to do more in order to get the same grade as someone next to them. And in a lot of ways that influences their perception of their own abilities and intelligence, when in reality, it's not an intelligence problem. It's more of a processing problem.
Yeah, exactly. And I think one of the hardest parts is that like people can't see it. It's an invisible kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that makes it even more invisible is there's a disparity problem. So with ADHD, a lot of people think that you're lazy, and it's because there's a huge disparity between your best performance and your worst performance. It's like you can look like you can solve world hunger when you're at your best, but you can also look like you can't even open a lock to a door because it's a simple mundane task when somebody's watching you. And so with ADHD, you yourself have seen yourself work really, really well, and you seem very competent. And so somebody on the outside that sees you fumble the bag when you're trying to remember like a basketball play or something like that, they're like, what's wrong with you? you know?
And you're kind of getting at one of the biggest frustrations people have with ADHD is like, I need to do so much more and I need to consider so many more factors in order to get to where I need to get to. And other people are just witnessing someone being forgetful. And it's crazy. I can see what you're saying too about someone going, be more present. Don't take notes. I have a lot of ADHD clients who do take notes for that very reason, because they can't retain the shit we're talking about. And it's like, I feel like ADHD gets a bad rap in the sense of when we were growing up, it was overdiagnosed and over medicated in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
So like a lot of parents threw kind of Adderall at their kids and didn't really consider the impacts it would have on a child's development, right? And so then I think after that wave of ADHD mania died down, what was left was people still with ADHD, but now it's like, oh, everyone has it. It's very easy to be dismissive about it, you know?
Definitely, especially right now when everybody's sort of drenched in what we're doing with social media. It's like we have, I don't know if a lot of people know this, but like Instagram, there's this 3-second kind of algorithm thing where your video gets pushed out more if you can hold their attention for at least 3 seconds. And on TikTok, they're just like, all right, if your video is not stimulating enough, we're just not going to show it to the rest of the world. And so you have what's being displayed to anybody that has an iPhone between the ages of whatever, 4 to 18 or 20. I mean, every age can have an iPhone at this time. You are being exposed to professionals that are trained to give you the most stimulating piece of content. And you're constantly looking at that and swiping repeatedly over all of that and saturating your mind with all this dopamine. And so I think there's this tough gray area to find when it comes to ADHD that's clinical versus the impact that a lot of stimulation has on the mind over a long period of time. And it's like, I think I would even want to consult with a psychiatrist to see, well, what do you think about that line, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like it's almost like mimicking or creating like a manufactured ADHD state in people who don't have attention problems.
Yeah.
But going back to the so on the inattention side of an ADHD diagnosis, you tell me if this rings true for you. But I think often the misconception about someone with ADHD is that they can't maintain attention, and I think it's more of they can't regulate attention. So on one hand, they can fixate on scrolling through TikTok for 3 hours and get lost in a spiral without realizing it. Like they're capable of retaining attention under certain circumstances, but it's dysregulated in the sense that they can't control it. Like they can't take themselves out if they want to take themselves out of a moment where they're, doom scrolling. And the same goes on the other side. Sometimes they can't get into anything, can't get into a TV show, lose interest in a conversation immediately. So it's both sides. It's almost like on the spectrum of attention, they're just going rapidly back and forth as opposed to staying on one side, which people think is they can't pay attention at all.
Yeah, exactly. It's the regulation of attention. I've never heard it said that way, but that makes perfect sense, like in terms of defining it. Because with ADHD, you have this fine-tuned attention, which is another symptom here with hyperfocus.
Mm-hmm.
And so with hyperfocus, it's like your area of interest is so black and white. Like you can be obsessed with the TV show or obsessed with the song, so you listen to it like 100 times. Or you can be completely unstimulated and you're cracking jokes at the TV or trying to just find some source of stimulation while you're watching something that's very boring. And I think the same thing can happen in relationships. But yeah, 100%. Like with ADHD, it's because sometimes you're actually too focused on something, which makes everything else invisible. It's like you have this, that's why ADHD can also be associated with anger, because you hear about like tunnel vision. So with ADHD, you're focusing that attention in one area, and then all the areas of blindness is just pure lack of stimulation and out of your awareness. And so that's why people on the outside say you're blind. You have tons of blind spots and you can't see anything, because you do. But the reason is because you have too much attention in some areas and it's not regulated well, just like you said.
Yeah, I mean, because at the core, like the difference between someone who's like afraid of snakes and someone with ADHD is someone who's afraid of snakes can still, take a math test and stay focused.
Yeah.
Someone with ADHD, it's going to trickle into every aspect of their life. Like it's almost like you're touching reality wearing gloves. Like you're like, I know what this is supposed to feel like, but there's a bit of a layer between me and it. And it's kind of preventing me from experiencing this thing on the most fundamental level that it should be experienced.
Yeah, exactly. Like I don't really know. I've never thought about that analogy before, but it feels so right to think about it that way. Like it's like you're trying to touch something with gloves, but it's not quite there. So you kind of have to fake it till you make it.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, this goes a little bit more deep into some of the indirect symptoms of ADHD, but rejection sensitivity. With ADHD, there's a huge need to look towards your environment to determine what's like normal. And the first thing to really demystify is, well, what is normal? Who defines what's normal? And is that a good thing? So when I work with people with ADHD, I always use the language that's more popular today of neurotypical and neurodivergent. And so with ADHD, you're neurodivergent, and it doesn't mean that just because you're away from the norm on the bell curve that you're wrong. And yet, when you're trying to determine how to act when you're with other people in an environment, I think there is some degree to which you have to look towards the norm or the expectations so that you don't get exposed to negative consequences in your environment. So a lot of times with ADHD, you can be really susceptible to, am I doing this right?
Mm-hmm.
You're afraid of your environment telling you no, and you can be more trusting in that way too.
I like that you're saying this, because this is some, like you have like little bits, like a stand-up comedian has bits.
Yeah.
Like I have bits as a therapist, and one of my bits is exactly what you're saying, which is people with ADHD. Imagine like so like the birth of rejection sensitivity in ADHD feels like it comes from what you're saying, which is imagine you're 5 years old or 10 years old, you're taking an exam with all of your fellow like school children, and it's your first experience of taking like a real exam. People are next to you also taking it, and when they're done, they go up and hand it into the teacher. And you're just sitting there kind of watching people slowly start to get up. And all of a sudden you're like on halfway through it and everyone's mostly done. And it creates this conditioning in you to start looking and going, what's this difference between them and me? Why is it taking me longer? And that happens over and over and over again. You develop this almost inability to not compare yourself to others. And then that leads to constantly seeking information in your environment to know who you are, which is always a disaster when we're talking about identity development, you know?
Yeah, chills. Like that experience of watching your peers finish their test first. Like,
I'm like,
100%.
fuck that guy. There's a couple of people who got up early and you just could see the smugness on their face.
Yeah,
Fuck you, man.
I mean, a lot of people can look at someone with ADHD like they're a goldfish or something like that. Like, I'm better than you kind of stance. Like, I finished my test first and all that. But I mean, a big thing to realize with ADHD is that in our environment, people are rewarded more so for not having ADHD. And yet there's still some cool gifts that really come with it. There's that hyper focus that can get you engaged in something like no other person can. And there's also a whole lot of structures in society that keep you from living that out. I think there's also even studies that talk about how if we were in hunter and gatherers times, ADHD people would be the first person finishing the test in your analogy, right? And you're looking for things and getting them done because you're stimulated, you're ready to run and move and go with the hyperactivity part of ADHD. And there's so much to unpack there, but we do live in a society where you can be more shamed because of a lot of your ADHD tendencies, which is unfortunate.
And it's because we're being painted into a box at an early age of like what the model person's supposed to look like. And they're supposed to be really good at studying and really good at taking tests. And there's this British guy that I follow on TikTok. He's like, just like some funny dude. I forget his name. It's like Bosch or something. But he makes food and he's just like an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
And I think he probably is hyperactive ADHD if I had to guess. But he was being interviewed and someone was asking him like, you know, did you do well in school? And he was like, no, I didn't do well in school. But like, if you're looking at a bunch of monkeys and saying, climb that tree, and I'm a shark, like, yeah, I'm not going to climb the tree. But if you put us all in water, like, who's going to do well? Who's going to do better? And I kind of feel like people with ADHD, especially the hyperactive kinds, end up being really good entrepreneurs because they're capable of rapidly shifting their attention and kind of keeping 6 spinning plates in the air at once without anything falling.
100%. Yeah. And it's funny because like we have the same analogies, just with different animals.
I'm going to keep stealing. I'm going to keep saying it before you.
Yeah.
So they're like, Jacob doesn't know shit.
I wasn't planning on talking about that one today, but with my clients, I'm always just like, think about a giraffe versus a lion, and you live in an environment where you're expected to eat leaves from a tree. You know, like you're the king of the jungle. You're the entrepreneur. So I'm like, wow, yeah, we're kind of. But I mean, something else that's really cool, going back to the inattention symptoms of ADHD, a helpful way that I help clients understand what your experience is like is this. I mean, there's a tool called Johari's Window. And it's basically this tool that allows you to categorize the 4 areas of human consciousness. And so there's one area which is something that you're aware of that other people are also aware of. And that's like, I'm wearing a gray shirt today and you know that. Then there's another area of what I'm aware of that other people aren't. So like, you know, if I had a thought about you that I didn't share, you would, I mean, you can read me pretty well. So.
You're describing my dissertation, by the way.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And then there's another box of what other people are aware of that you're not aware of. And then there's a 4th box of unknown, like nobody's aware of it. And you might become aware of it if you go to therapy or something with me or Vinny.
Only us.
Only us. And the reason I point this out is because with ADHD, the 3rd box is the biggest in comparison to other human beings. What other people are aware of that you're not. That you might have a piece of food on your mouth and you could see it and point it out and say, hey, you have something on your face. Because with ADHD, you're more impulsive and you have more hyperfocus, so you're less aware of the things that people might assume that you're already aware of. So you're going into life a little blind, but I also think that's part of the reason why I have a huge respect for people with ADHD, because you have a lot of hope. Because for you, if you're someone with ADHD that's comfortable going out into the world and really diving deep into community, relationships, and work, you have to assume that there's probably going to be things that you miss more so than other people, and trust that you're in an environment where people can catch those things for your benefit and not for your demise.
Mm-hmm. And the reality is if you surround yourself with good people, that will be the case. And if you surround yourself with shitty people, they'll use it against you.
Yep. Got to be careful.
But it's interesting. I like the breakdown of that. Like your awareness is just going to have some blind spots that are unique to the ADHD presentation.
Yeah, totally.
Oh, one more thing about the inattention.
Mm-hmm.
Because I've noticed this, especially like with adults with ADHD, because there's such a memory issue with the working memory part of their brain. The forgetfulness when they get older can often be misconstrued as like early signs of dementia. Like the fact that you're forgetting where you left the coffee cup is not necessarily a sign that you're in the early stages of some dementia-related disorder. It could just be your entire life where your working memory has been somewhat impaired, and as an adult in a particular age range, you're more hyper fixated on the possibility of it being something worse.
Mm-hmm. Wow, I've never thought about that.
And I kind of like to think of like the memory of someone with ADHD, like like little science sensory memory, like the flash moment of what you're witnessing and your senses in a couple of seconds. But then working memory is that 0 to 30 second time where you can hold ideas in your head and sequence thoughts and memories and whatever. And then long-term memory is where your experiences are encoded and stored in the different parts of your brain. But anyway, your working memory with ADHD, I always look at it kind of like, imagine like a Tupperware with a little crack on the bottom, right? So you fill it up with water, but after about 10 seconds, it starts leaking water. And by the time you're at 30 seconds, it's completely empty. Whereas with someone without ADHD, there might be a significant amount of water left after 30 seconds. And so you're constantly up against this clock of, oh, shit, I have to like do something with this information right now or it's going to disappear. And it's just a tough, I mean, I don't have ADHD, but I have a lot of people in my immediate family with pretty severe cases. And it's like, I just dodged that bullet somehow, but there is a genetic component to it. And it's hard to witness someone dealing with that memory stuff.
Yeah, I'm gonna that was crazy what you just said, because that analogy is just another one that's just always rung true that I've told Toby about 100 times.
Oh,
Not
really?
with a container, but like with my hands and feeling like water is just falling through your fingertips when it comes to responsibilities.
Can I tell you something?
Yeah.
That analogy I have used a handful of times. I've tried it out on people. And it's like not like in a way like I'm so smart, more like it just didn't land.
Yeah.
And so as I'm saying it right now, I'm like, this isn't landing.
No, man. I was like, I'm gonna punch you in the stomach. Stop making me feel so. Yeah.
And that's the thing. This is like the first topic we're talking about where I genuinely just have no like personal experience with it. So it's really just my observations and other people.
Yeah.
Whereas with like all the other things, like we can all be a little selfish. We can all have shame and anger and anxiety.
Right.
But this, I'm just like, I'm more just like, I'm like studying you.
Tossing stuff off
Elizabeth.
the wall. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I mean, that's part of the reason why it's like this topic resonates so deeply with me, because I can relate a whole lot to the combined type. But I mean, just to speak a little more to the water falling through
in
your
the hands,
fingertips,
yeah.
because I love that so much. It feels so real. One of the topics that I wanted to get into is like attachment styles in ADHD. So like what happens when you have avoidant attachment and ADHD? Well, it makes it so that when you walk into a new environment that's unfamiliar, it feels like all the details that are important can fall right through your fingertips. Just like the analogy you were talking about. And so I think with avoidant attachment, what happens is you make a judgment call. I'd rather not exist in this environment at all, or I'd rather overcompensate, like extremely overcompensate, to make sure that I have a million ways to capture all the responsibilities that might fall out of my hands. So you might find that you memorize the parking structure of a location, or you memorize a million times where you walk in, to the left, to the right as you get into the building. And that's just not by mistake with avoidant attachment, because you might have a panic attack if you're in an unfamiliar environment, because you feel like with ADHD, you're forcing yourself into a state of vulnerability and dependency on your environment. And that's the thing that people with avoidant attachment hate the most. So that breeds even more avoidance, you know. And I don't know. I can't put words to it, but that analogy is just so good.
I like the hands one too. No, I mean, like what you're saying too, it makes sense. Like if you already have an avoidant disposition and you know going into a social situation that it's going to be emotionally taxing, I mean, that's enough for me to just stay home. But I understand what you're saying, that there are times when you can't avoid it, and it's just the amount of mental load that is required for you to get through something is exhausting. Like there's a lot of research to suggest that people with ADHD who are particularly smart, like you, for instance, can mask the ways in which it might impair them, like memorizing a parking lot or something, as a way to navigate their social environment with less challenges. But the flip side of that is when you're smart and you have ADHD, it probably is easier to go undetected in school. So you're kind of feeling different, still getting A's, and kind of it's all experienced personally by yourself because no one is witnessing it.
Yeah, exactly. That's the experience, because the only thing that feels weird for other people is like, well, why do you write everything down? Or why are you spending extra time, wanting to record the lectures or whatever, and people are like, you'll just absorb it. But yeah, it's very different. And especially if you're not aware that it's possibly ADHD. You just think that, well, I just need this extra help. And I think some people with ADHD can get to a place where they've seen other people pass them up, but they've also seen what they're capable of if they really put their mind to something and hyper-focus on it, right? So I know a lot of people with ADHD that get to a point where they feel like, all right, well, you think that you're better than me? Well, you better believe I can work 100 times harder than you to prove you wrong, that I can do this better. I can be the best. And there's this interesting level of confidence that comes with ADHD sometimes, because it's not just because you work harder than the next person, but it's because when you do work harder and get interested in something, you can hyper-focus and be more focused than most people. So it's like you quickly go from being the worst at something to the best at something in terms of whatever you consider to be efficient or not.
That makes a lot of sense. And I've experienced that with a lot of people where they are capable of being superhuman. But the issue is not their capacity, it's the longevity of their superhuman nature. And like, I kind of feel like one of the things I need, some clients with ADHD, intellectually, they know they need to accept this thing. But deep down, they're still trying to break this disorder the way you would break a wild horse. Like at some point, I'm going to get it so that it doesn't run away when I try to saddle it up. And it's like on some level, you're never going to fully accomplish that, because it's not about this moment. It's about for the entirety of your life, it's never going to be completely stable. You can stabilize it in certain ways to make it less intense, but it's always going to, sometimes you're going to be hyperfixated and other times you're going to lose attention easily. And the more you try and control that beyond what's within your control, is the more you're going to be frustrated and blame yourself and create a lot of shame about what's wrong with you.
Yes. If you are someone who's extremely successful, I've worked with a lot of people who are extremely successful with like ADHD and reaching the next level and all whatever is considered reaching the next level. But like with ADHD, you can become obsessed with like self-operating systems. And then you feel like, okay, well, I'm just like everybody else now. And you have a million self-operating systems that you basically install your own ADHD coach. You have scheduled emails that are like relentless. You have a short-term reminder when it's your phone on your alarm. You have calendar reminders, and then you have a to-do list, and you have another to-do list that reminds you to look at your other to-do list. And so you have like this, you basically have this nagging like mom in your ear telling you like, hey, this is what you need to do, and you need that, right? But yeah, with ADHD, you can sort of, like you said, try to break it like a wild horse and think that, well, I've solved it, I'm successful. And yet a lot of those people are still coming to therapy because they feel anxious. They feel like they're carrying the weight of the world, Now they're not just carrying a bowl of water, but they're trying to carry all of the relationships that are important to them, because of if one of these self-operating systems stops working, they know that they'll lose everything. And so it's no matter what, you have to keep coming back to the fact that there is something going on with this disability. And I think there's that acceptance that I think you're getting at, right? Of this is not something that you can just break. Maybe you can look efficient on the outside, and yet there's still some work to be done when it comes to either medication or more solutions around like dealing with this.
You make such a good point. That is such a thing I've noticed. There are certain type A, or not type A, but there are certain types of ADHD people that are going out of their way to automate their life so that every way ADHD impacts them is like immediately addressed with post-it notes and hooks on walls, and all and labels and all that stuff. And at the end of the day, there's still a little bit left over that you're not going to extinguish by tooling your way through it. And you have to accept that part, not fight it.
Yes. And that's also a huge point too, because people who are very successful with ADHD look like the opposite of people with ADHD, because I've known a lot of people with ADHD that get extreme levels of panic if they have a responsibility that pops in their face and it doesn't either go on a to-do list or gets done in that moment. And so you have a lot of people that say, I need to take care of this right now. And if you email me and say it can't get done today, then don't email it to me. Like they seem like they're like OCD, when in reality it's rooted in ADHD. Because when you have ADHD, you make a judgment call of, I'm going to sort of like allow this thing to fall through the cracks and feel like that's okay because who knows, somebody will help me out, or I'll just procrastinate. Or you want to overcome it because you want more control in your environment, and you take a million steps to make sure that happens, and you just are excessive with it.
And it's almost like it's kind of part of the hero's journey of someone with ADHD, where they first feel helpless, then they realize they have this thing, and then they start addressing this thing with very useful techniques of helping their memory and helping their attention. And so they gain this sense of agency, but then that sense of agency starts to develop a momentum that can never sustain itself. Like there's a limit to how much agency you can feel with ADHD. And so just like me, someone who grew up with social anxiety, the way I compensated for it was getting really good at talking to people. But if I stay at that stage, I'm limiting my growth, and the next level has to be kind of scaling that back and not feeling like I need to be a certain way just to be accepted by people. And the same goes for people with ADHD. If you go beyond just using techniques and recognize there's still something left over and find a way to accept it and not fight it as much, and still be okay, and still notice you're okay in the world, that you're not going to get fired simply because you forgot one thing, it all of a sudden kind of helps you get to that next level.
Yeah. I mean, this is really helpful, I guess, for my personal journey to think about like, and this is something I'm thinking about newly today, but there's a couple of like some of my favorite like heroes. Like I'm really a big like anime nerd and stuff. So I'll like watch like Dragon Ball Z or Cowboy Bebop and this other guy. I can't remember the name of the show, but telling. But I really like the heroes who are very, very passionate and they can try to reach the next level, like Goku or Luffy and all those characters. And I think one of the things I like about them is that they do these incredible things. And then before you know it, they just look like a goofball out of nowhere. And it's like, wait, you did that and you did that. And it's like, it's not to make fun of them, but more so to be like, there's something refreshing about it and different. And that's where I think some of my acceptance comes in, when I realize that Goku wouldn't be Goku unless he also slipped and fell on his head and got a bruise, even though he could beat Frieza.
And I feel like when I met you, that was like a big thing. Like when I told you how much wild shit I say in session, because I don't think you have to be perfect to be a good therapist. And then you started fucking around too, and it felt good. Like,
yeah,
like you're still good even when you falter for a second. And that kind of like when you were talking about ADHD and attachment, it makes me think of like, if you go with the analogy of you're a kid and someone's taking an exam and everyone's finishing before you, and it develops this sense of comparison, it's like when you are constantly comparing yourself to others and you develop this little seed of doubt that maybe there's something wrong with me because I'm just taking me longer and blah, 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 it's going to be very, very much tied to your intelligence, but also just your greater sense of self. There's a lot of shame I've noticed with people who have ADHD that they're not really even fully aware of when I meet them. And maybe I'm biased because I'm such an emotion focused therapist, but like, people with ADHD have so much shame that they're unaware of because they grew up looking at everyone else and going, why does it feel like I'm wearing, lead shoes when everyone else seems to be running so much easier?
Yeah, totally. 100%. And then you get yelled at by coaches or people like, why can't you memorize this play? We've run this play 5 times and you can't get it. You're lazy. And I think that's why people with ADHD get labeled as lazy a whole lot, because they've seen how good you can perform in one area and then so poorly in another. But you're right. Like, you not only do you hear that voice internally, but it happens externally a whole lot too. And it's just, yeah, it's really hard when you don't know what's going on with that.
There's this TikTok I saw like a couple of days ago of this woman in like a college class, and she was arguing with the professor, and she was like, you give like 100-page PowerPoints and it's impossible to follow. Like, can't you just like synthesize your information so that it's more digestible? And he was like, oh, kids these days. It's like, no, dude, you're just not, you probably have tenure. You don't give a fuck anymore. And you just throw a bunch of information at people and expect them to just figure it out. Meanwhile, like, some of the smartest people are being almost like discriminated against because you're unwilling to accommodate a very real thing that's affecting so many of us.
Exactly. And it's not a cop-out to say, hey, I want to give you an easier life. It's more so to say, don't close the door to what could turn into extreme potential in somebody with ADHD just because you feel like they have to fit into your box. There's so much potential out there. And sometimes it is important to, hey, like, follow the rules, do what you got to do all that. But also, yeah, don't close the door on that.
Something related that, okay, I have like 6 thoughts. I'm just going to try and say them all at once. People with ADHD often get overwhelmed. There is a tendency towards being overwhelmed because people with ADHD have a more difficult time regulating their emotions, because your emotion regulation is located in the similar part of your brain where ADHD is affected. But that being aside, I think a lot of times people with ADHD have difficulty making decisions, and sometimes unconsciously they'll overwhelm themselves in order to avoid making a decision. So for instance, if like we're saying, like, where should we go to get something to eat, and you like maybe have social anxiety and you don't want to pick a place because it's gonna, maybe what if I don't like it? So you kind of want me to make the decision. And so, but all this is happening under the surface. So what you do is you start listing like 5 places and you go, oh, I don't know. It's a way for you to avoid making a decision, because making a decision is difficult for people with ADHD.
Definitely. Yeah. And it's like going back to the working memory thing, right? Like, when I think about fear, I think about you're overloaded with information and it's starting to overwhelm you because you don't have enough cognitive space for it. With ADHD, that cognitive space is reduced to a shorter working memory. So now not only is it harder to remember all these things, but you feel overwhelmed, and it's easier sometimes to just say, all right, I'm just not going to think about it. We'll see what happens, and I'll let reality make the decision. And truly, that actually does lead to some benefits sometimes, because that makes it so that your environment has to work a little harder for you. Like, we're not going to go somewhere good because Jacob is not really thinking too hard about where he wants to go. And so then other people carry that labor, and then you get the experience of, well, it actually does work out if you just don't think about things and you're happy-go-lucky.
It conditions you.
And also it's something to not ignore, because you don't want to make your environment work harder for you. Because with ADHD, going back to another intention symptom, it's so hard to get out of bad habits, because once something is out of your awareness, you don't even know it's a habit that you need to shift or change. And then other people in your environment might experience the negative consequences of it. So I'm getting a little bit into the tips here, but one really effective strategy that I found to be useful for helping with ADHD is asking for feedback. And I know that sounds very simple, but with ADHD, you can sometimes come across as some of the most capable people on the planet, and yet you're the most unaware people on the planet when it comes to the things you don't know. So what happens when people see you as capable, yet you do something that's really not effective and silly? Well, most people are going to assume that you're aware of it and you're just doing it because you don't care. When in reality, you need that feedback. And I would also say is really make yourself open to that feedback, because with ADHD, it's so hard to be critiqued because of rejection sensitivity. So what you really have to do is find someone you trust and allow them to give you good feedback, and allow yourself to feel hurt that you've missed something that was really important for a long time. Digest it, feel it, and then also don't turn to shame. Don't allow yourself to sit in that pit. Allow yourself to use that information. Validate that you have ADHD and you miss things. Share that with your partner and work towards growth.
Perfectly said. No, you're totally right. It's such an important thing, and because in the analogy of with ADHD, you're touching reality with gloves on. The confirmation you need of like, this is an apple, right? It's like, yes, it is, or no, it's not. Whatever the data is, it's important for someone that is a third party to validate or affirm your experience so that you feel confident in your compass.
Yeah,
that'd be such a cheesy book. Confident, feeling confident in your compass.
You have book ideas every episode.
I know.
Okay, wait, what about the maybe we could talk a little bit more about the combined type and the hyperactive type. I mean, we talked a lot about a lot of symptoms altogether.
Wait, can I just do one more on attention?
Yeah.
Because I feel like, the history of ADHD, it was much more diagnosed in boys because it was more hyperactive presenting, and a hyperactive boy is very obvious in a classroom. But then it went underdiagnosed in girls because they're more kind of leaning towards the inattentive type, and the inattentive type is not visibly observable. And so a lot of girls who became women grew up with an ADHD that was undiagnosed, and so their identity was really hit hard by not being able to label something that was significantly impacting their ability to learn and interact with others and socialize and maintain relationships. It fucked kind of everything up.
Yeah. I mean, as women in society, in our culture, it's, especially if you rewind a few years, like there's always been this expectation that women would be more dependent as well. And so with ADHD, you're finding that you are depending on external cues a whole lot more. And so what happens when you're a kid that relies on more external cues, you have difficulties with working memory, and you're also expected to not be impulsive. Well, I think that you have someone who's a woman who is not labeled as having ADHD, because people are in society are kind of putting you in that box already,
and they're masking it too. Like,
and they're masking it.
They're better at masking it. I feel like I don't know, this is like an overgeneralization, but I feel like women are emotionally much more aware from an earlier age and able to recognize their feelings. And so even the emotion dysregulation is masked by like an inherent maturity in a 13-year-old girl rather than a 13-year-old boy who's,
right,
kicking a locker or something.
Exactly. You're expected to have that under control, and you can't just quite go out, and you have to kind of move around the huge authority that is more physically dominating or mean. And so it's unfair, but I think that's what happens a whole lot.
And to bring it to what you were saying of like the combined presentation and the hyperactive side, like you mentioned impulsivity, and I feel like impulsivity kind of touches all three. It touches the inattentive, it touches the combined, and it touches the hyperactive ADHD person, because at its core, impulsivity is that part of the brain that ADHD influences. And so your ability to inhibit your behavior is significantly impacted when you have ADHD, and it affects much more observably hyperactive ADHD people.
Oh yeah. And I think impulsivity deserves so much time, because it's like with impulsivity, it affects like relationships, dating, addiction, anger. And I mean, yeah, I think one cool point with impulsivity is even with speech patterns. Like with ADHD, people might be surprised at how much you're willing to talk about things that feel irrelevant sometimes. But I think what's happening with ADHD is the impulsivity piece keeps you from holding on to some of your thoughts prior to sharing them. You want to get a point out before you fully formulate what's actually happening in here. You want to get your emotions out before fully formulating what happens in here. So if you have ADHD and anxious attachment combined in one, impulsivity is going to look like you're spouting out information, and a lot of people don't have a whole lot of meaning or context to apply to what you're saying. You do, and maybe you don't even know why, but you're getting that information out impulsively, and you're enjoying the benefit of communion with another person, and yet you're probably speed firing those things, which is overwhelming sometimes to people around you, and you might talk for a long time.
100%. Can I make a very insensitive joke?
Yeah.
This is my impression of someone with ADHD and impulsivity who has anxious attachment. Ready?
Mhm.
Okay, you have to start talking.
Sorry. Okay, how are you doing?
No, just like don't ask me a question. Just start
Okay.
talking.
Yeah. The thing about
Don't leave me.
Sorry.
That was for you. That's for
Yeah.
no one else.
You didn't anticipate though my ADHD. Like, wait, what? Catching me off guard.
Don't leave me.
No, that's I mean, that goes back to one of the reasons I think people wanted this podcast was because this, before we shift away from inattention, because this goes into it again. But let's just keep going. You know, impulsivity and all that hyperactive stuff, we'll get into it. But ADHD is marked by issues with object permanence. So if you have anxious attachment and ADHD, you have a lot of experiences of people abandoning you, even when they might not have abandoned you, because you have a hard time knowing when people are actually there versus not. And so object permanence is understanding that when you play a game of peekaboo, that when the person covers their hands on their face, they're actually still there as a kid. And so kids take a while to develop that, but with ADHD, object permanence is less developed. So when you have a fear of abandonment lumped on top of issues with object permanence, then that intensifies the symptoms of anxious attachment severely. And so now you need more evidence to know people are there. And then the more evidence you get, the more reassurance you need, et cetera.
Are you thinking of my object permanence theory that I said a few podcasts ago?
Yes, yeah.
Because I don't think people think of it as in adulthood, but I feel like you're right. Like if you think of all of the disorders that have fear of abandonment kind of in the symptomatology, then you look at a lot of them have a developmental component, like borderline personality disorder, ADHD. Like there's an element of your upbringing is significantly influenced by this thing. And so it makes sense that, like you were saying, people with ADHD who at its core it's a developmental disorder, they're going to be more impacted by people coming and going or their perception that they're going.
Certainly.
And also having ADHD does put a strain on relationships, as I point to you. No, it has a strain by its very nature, you know, like it's harder as partners of people with ADHD have a difficult time navigating the many ways in which it influences relationships. Like that's just a reality of the disorder. It's not like a death sentence to a relationship, but it is something to monitor. And when someone forgets something, when your partner who has ADHD forgets that you ask them to do the laundry and maybe you misinterpret that as, well, you just don't care enough about me, right? That's the root cause of a lot of relationship conflict when ADHD is the culprit.
Right. Yeah. It's like you think that they don't care about you, when in reality, it's because you're not in their habitual system of awareness. And so if you create a system of awareness for that person with ADHD, more often than not, when something changes, their partner is blown away by how much they're doing. In fact, it can get unhealthy in the other direction where the person with ADHD shifts their systems and now they're not aware of how much you're doing, but they're doing all the stuff. And then you can get kind of caught up in that whole thing. I also wanted to add too to the anxious attachment piece, but a lot of people ask the question like, I have anxious attachment and yet I can't think of a past experience where I was abandoned. And that's a really interesting subject, but one piece that is actually really interesting with that is if you lump in ADHD, that can be helpful in understanding why you feel such a fear of abandonment, even though you haven't had a big experience of being abandoned. Because with ADHD, it's likely that you've had past experiences where you get hyper stimulated by something, you hyper focus as a kid, and you see a red shirt at the mall and you dart for it. And then you have so much fun, whatever it is, with that red shirt. And then you look left and right. Where's my support system? Where's my mom? Where's my people? And because of that experience, you're not old enough to really understand that the reason people aren't there is because you abandoned them. You start to realize in that moment that in a moment, my support system can be gone. And you take that message into adulthood, and with anxious attachment, you can really just feel like in a second, people can disappear. And you start to apply that to yourself, and you think, well, it's because I'm forgetful. It's because I'm not enough of something. When in reality, that wound is still there because you were abandoned, but more so in your mind. You were the one who abandoned them.
That's a very new thought I've never heard, but that really makes sense. Like, that's a really good point. And it really just makes me think of, like, think about the root cause of the root belief of someone with anxious attachment often is, I have to do more than the average person to maintain my relationships with people. If I stop doing extra, they're going to leave. That's my fear. And the same exact belief can also apply to someone with ADHD. My natural existence is not enough to keep people around. So I have to overcompensate with more effort and activity in order to keep people close. It's actually the exact same thought. It just comes from different places.
Wow. Straight chills. I hadn't thought about that, but you're right. The person who's afraid of losing attachments as an adult with ADHD abides by the same thinking process that actually got them farther away from their support system in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
I have to work harder. I have to hyper-focus more, when it was sometimes hyper-focus that led you away from the things that mattered most, that were right in front of you the whole time.
And it also like creates both things, and when they're combined, one thing, they create the same problem, which is like, people are always leaving unless I have to put in, I have to put in more effort to keep people around. What it says to you about your self-worth is that you're not valued by just existing. And then that creates shame. And then that creates isolation, because if everyone requires so much effort just to keep them around, there's going to be a point when you're burnt out where you just say, fuck it. Like, I don't want to put in all this effort. And so they kind of snowball into each other. And that's why I think people with, if you look at like comorbid disorders, ADHD goes hand in hand with so much of the anxiety and depression stuff, specifically because it bleeds into that stuff.
Yeah, of course. It's inevitable, really.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Wow.
I'm so like, and the genetic component is so interesting, because if someone has ADHD, it's likely that someone else in their family has ADHD. There's such a genetic aspect to it.
Yeah, it's 100% tied to genetics. It's not just this. And I think a lot of people can really assume that it's a lot of environmental stuff, when in reality, it's a whole lot of that.
I mean, think about it. Think about how many people are having this like kind of faux ADHD because of the fact that they're on tablets all the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yet still they're not even at the threshold of being diagnosable, because as hard as they work into being diagnosable, it's still, ADHD at its core is still a structural problem.
Yeah.
And they're not experiencing a structural problem. They're experiencing more of a conditioning. It'd be interesting in like 20 years if there was a disorder that's more of an environmental kind of mimicking of ADHD without the biological component
Yeah,
to
I
it.
wonder if that, let's put it in a DSM.
When you have a kid, let's just right away put a tablet in front of his face.
See what we'll do a case study.
Well, actually, genetically, he might.
Right?
Well, he's got a good dad to help him navigate it.
That's right. I follow you now. Yeah. Yeah.
Also, this is such a random thought. It has nothing to do with what we were talking about, but I was thinking about it 10 minutes ago.
What?
How cool would it be if it was like a tag team therapy where we sat like this and then someone's over there, and we just
start
like
grilling them.
charge them like a crazy amount, just like bam, bam.
Yeah. That's what people are getting watching YouTube, I
like
guess.
a new kind of therapy.
Like just speed, quick therapy. You would be healed in like 20 minutes.
You'd be like the good therapist. It's like good cop, bad cop.
Yeah, you
I'd
totally
be the bad one.
cop. Yeah, you'd be cursing them out. I'd be like,
people
it's
seek
okay, he
me
doesn't
out.
mean it.
People seek me out when they're like a masochist. They're like, just tell me. I know you're direct. Just say it.
Just say what I need. I could send some clients your way. I want to talk about dating too, because I think that wraps into impulsivity. Have you ever heard of this word going around on TikTok, limerence?
Yeah.
That's super interesting when you think about ADHD and dating, because with ADHD, dating is extremely traumatic, a whole lot more so than people think. And I think people think with they see someone who's gone through a breakup with ADHD and they're heartbroken, and they think, well, yeah, but it's not like, somebody didn't die or something like that. But I think we underestimate the pain of people who go through breakups with ADHD, and it's because a lot of people with ADHD inevitably feel this limerence for this other person. And limerence is basically when you hyper-focus on someone else, another human being, you become obsessed with them. And of course, ADHD is hyper-focus and impulsivity. So when you lump hyper-focus and impulsivity together on another human being, I mean, what happens? I mean, you think about that person all the time. That person starts to feel like God, and they can give you both heaven and hell by rejecting you. And so the stakes feel high. And then when you tie in impulsivity, now you have a hard time not always texting them or taking action. And so you either engage in extreme levels of inhibition, or you don't talk to them at all and try to play the hard to get game. And I don't think there's anything subtle that you can do with ADHD. You wear your expressions on your face. So if you are dating and you have ADHD, you have a very black and white perspective of who you want to be with versus who you don't, because people who aren't in your flavor of interest aren't stimulating at all. So all that to say, dating sucks for people with ADHD sometimes, not all the time. It's really hard to find a balanced way to approach dating.
That's a really interesting thought. Like a lot of this stuff is like our new ideas, at least to me. Like this is a new idea. And it kind of makes sense though, because someone without ADHD, when they have a hard breakup, they're also a little fixated on the breakup and the person and whatever. And so it's like, take that, but someone with ADHD, it's almost like you're throwing, lighter fluid on what already would have been happening. And it becomes that much more intense, even though it was intense probably for the average person anyway. It seems like it's just much more miserable if you have a difficulty with your, and that's the reality, is a lot of times people, the way they get over a breakup is they distract themselves, but it's hard to distract yourself if there's this large thing that's drawing your attention, so profoundly. Also, can I take a quick piss? I have to be so bad.
Go.
How do I?
Take your time, man.
It's just gonna be.
I'm not gonna make it.
Last and then last.
I'm so glad you stopped. Did we get that on tape? Good. Oh, man. Oh, wow. It's only 1:16. Are you still recording, or you paused it?
We're still recording.
Oh, wow.
You can pause it if you want.
Yeah, sure. You can pause it.
Well, it's gonna be two separate files. I can't pause.
Oh,
it,
never mind.
Stop it, and then...
Keep it going. Maybe I'll just talk about Vinny Wiley's. Well, I'll keep the episode going, I guess. Yeah, I mean, something else that's really important about dating is that you can be very black and white when it comes to who's in your flavor of interest. So if you're dating someone and you don't feel stimulated by them, it's going to be really hard to stay interested in that relationship because it feels so black and white. So with dating, I think a good tip for people with ADHD is to see past the illusion. This person seems very interesting, but they might not necessarily be as high as you want them to be in your life. And I mean, something else that makes me think about is with fearful attachment. So attachment is extremely hard when it comes to dating and relationships. If you are someone with fearful attachment and you have ADHD, well, then that makes it so that you both have a deep desire to be with someone, the symptoms of anxious attachment, and you also have the same desire to not be betrayed in relationships because of your avoidant attachment tendencies. So when you think fearful attachment, think the worst parts of anxious attachment and avoidant attachment together. So when you have a desire to be with someone and they feel like God to you, then you're like, oh my gosh, like this is impossible for me to navigate. So a lot of times people with, oh, there he is. A lot of people with fearful attachment can probably want to inhibit gigantic emotions. So with fearful attachment, you're not inhibiting a firework, you're inhibiting a hand grenade. I asked him to pause it, but he said he couldn't. And so I was
That's
like,
fine.
because
I
he
don't
had to
care.
make 2 files. So I was like, well, I'll just talk
2
about
foul?
random stuff. No, he would have to make 2 files. If he can't
I don't.
call,
Yeah, it's
so.
fine. I don't really care. I mean, I have no shame with that. The amount of times, I think I hold the record for the amount of times a therapist mid-session has to just like get up and take a shit.
You've done that? You taking a shit in between in the middle?
I've done that so many times I can't count how many times I've done that.
That's hilarious because like I never have to usually do that, but I'll just have to take a piss sometimes and I'll go. But I feel like once or twice I'm like, I'm sorry, man.
And I don't hide it. I'm like, go on your phone.
Yeah.
For the next 5 minutes, just pretend I'm not doing what I'm doing.
I was just talking a little more about dating and what fearful attachment can look like with that. But just basically that is all. You want to hear it again?
No, it's fine. But
Yeah.
I imagine that fearful attachment is something that might develop when you're, walking. I feel like ADHD is like this constant walking uphill of existence. And so something that's so emotionally taxing, like dating, ugh.
Yeah.
I don't think I'd have a wife if I had ADHD.
Well, I mean, I feel like with ADHD, what happens is you either have someone deeply in your flavor of interest or not. And so you can actually be pretty alluring to people that are out of your awareness sometimes because you're not posturing as much. You're not trying to win them over. You're being just authentic you, which is usually the thing that attracts people the most is your authentic self. But the problem is when those people come into your life, you have a hard time seeing the stimulation. And when you have someone that is extremely interesting to you, you have a hard time holding back those impulses and you posture a whole lot. And so when you have those people around you, then you might scare them away because you start to treat them like God. And it's like, who wants to be treated like God all the time? That's like too much responsibility. So when you push those people away, you feel rejected, and then you're constantly rejecting the other people that you're not even aware of, and you're caught in that middle world. And so a lot of people with ADHD can be single for a very long time until they kind of figure out that all of the limerence is an illusion. It's not real. Once you date them long enough, oh, wait, I didn't realize this about them. I thought this was this and this was that. They're not perfect. Oh my gosh, I got the wrong person. It's like, no, you just have a difficult, normal relationship.
I mean, and you're talking about really idealization, like you're idealizing this person, right? And it makes sense that that's something someone with ADHD might do because it's just another compensating behavior, Like I'm going to, in some ways, manipulate my environment so that I can exist in it. So how do I manipulate this environment? Well, there's a person. I'm worried about losing my attention on them. So let's kind of puff them up to a point where I will never lose my attention on them. But that's a short-term solution because ultimately reality creeps back in.
Exactly. You're being something that you're not, and then that leads to all kinds of problems. You can figure it out, but you got to be authentic at some point.
And I think that's the biggest, I feel like that's the third phase. Like the first phase of ADHD is identifying that it's happening to you. But the second phase is taking measurable steps to try and reduce the impacts. But the third phase has to be like, how do I find a way for me to be my natural self and still be a successful human being? Because if at the end of the day, you're trying to go against your grain, even if you end up being, president or whatever, you're still going to feel lesser than because you're doing it in a way that's not true to yourself.
Yeah, exactly. You have to stick with authenticity somehow. You have to find, kind of like I did during this episode, a character that kind of embodies what you think is cool, but realize that you don't have to shift that to be something else. But also this might be a good time to shift a little practical too. Like, what are some practical tips for dealing with ADHD? And one of the things that I tell people a whole lot when it comes to the practical techniques is the first thing you have to realize with ADHD is the little stuff matters more so than you think. you're going to end up in therapy one day and you're going to see a therapist and they're going to tell you to drink more water and to sleep on time. And you're going to be like, wow, thank you. You just solved, that was very revolutionary. But in reality, it is like you need that because with one of the symptoms of ADHD is you only think the important things are the most stimulating things. And you undervalue the understimulating things like walking and getting some sunshine. Like if you try to work on your health, you're more than happy to go on a marathon, but you're not willing to walk every day and get some sunlight. Like that's where you got to start with ADHD. Even if it feels understimulating, you have to sleep on time. You have to wake up at the same time usually. You have to exercise. You have to drink water because you don't notice those bodily cues a whole lot. But start with the practical things, even if they seem small and mundane. That's a huge thing that people struggle with ADHD.
I think that's really well said. And the more zoomed out thought I have is you first have to accept that if you're trying to be a non-ADHD person, if you're trying to inhabit that approach to life, you're constantly going to be feeling lesser than. Like you have to accept that you need to do more in order to navigate your environment. You just do. You know, like I'm not saying you're a three-legged dog, but in some ways you have to figure out a way to navigate the fact that other people have this extra thing that you're not able to access. And if you can accept that, then you can excel. But if you fight that, if you just try to really remember things harder, you're just going to end up being really frustrated most of the time. And I find that people with ADHD who aren't as accepting of this thing that they have are often frustrated all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think frustration plays a big role because it's like frustration comes up when you see something that you think ought to be yours, but you can't have it. It's like you're salivating at the bite of a sandwich and then it gets yanked out in front of you.
Like for instance, imagine like you said, you have this superhuman power of kind of hyperfixating on something, right? So you're killing it, but then 2 days later, that project that is not yet finished, you're gonna completely, the bottom's gonna drop out. Like there's a part of you that's frustrated with the bottom dropping out, and rather than fighting it, maybe just accept that it's an inevitable part of the thing that you're dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
And you can do things to mitigate the drop, but if you're upset with the fact that your motivation comes and goes and it's very hard to control, then you're not accepting this thing that's very much deep inside of you.
Yeah. And I mean, that even goes to the overcompensation strategies and how to figure that out too, right? Like, because where do you find that line between overcompensating versus not overcompensating and mentally? And I like that acceptance route because I feel like people with ADHD, once they get kind of like caught chewing on the bone, they make a mistake and they just chew harder. And you don't realize of like, wait a minute, if you took a step back and you didn't bite into this thing, not only is that a practice of acceptance, but it's also healing, in a sense, the symptom in and of itself. Because a lot of people with ADHD, what they do is they try harder. They say, okay, well, this didn't land, so I'm going to throw 5 more points at you. Or I need to get the dishes done quick, so I'm going to operate on 5 things at once. And then you break a dish and now you have more work. And so a lot of times when you try to white knuckle it with ADHD, that's a symptom in and of itself and a lack of acceptance, which leads to more work for you. So if you actually practice that acceptance and just say, hey, I'm going at this pace, I am very impulsive and I notice what's happening in the room and I just get pulled into things, and just say that's okay, you feel less shame, and yet also you feel less of that desire to just push harder, which is going to make the situation even worse probably.
That's really well said. Like, I think the impulsivity is a huge part of it. Like, this is oversimplifying it, and it's a transactional relationship, not a sequential one, but regardless, stop qualifying. When you experience the impacts of your ADHD, like for instance, maybe your attention is dropping or your motivation's getting low, or your decision making is impaired in some way, right? So like, okay, that's the first wave of ADHD. But then the way your instinct to try and navigate it is to lean on the impulsivity. And so you almost try to solve one issue with another issue. You try to solve the fact that you have a hard time sustaining attention with an impulsive action, right? So you're kind of putting one problem in and replacing it with another. And obviously impulsive action often leads to worse outcomes in the long run. So it's like executive functioning is impaired. Let's solve it with some impulsive reaction. The impulsive reaction leads me into feeling crappy about myself. And then it's this like cyclical nature of like rinse and repeat of I feel crappy. I impulsively respond to that feeling crappy. And then I look at the fallout as something that's wrong with my internal character or whatever.
Wow. Yeah, totally. Nothing to add there.
But
That's good.
And this impulsivity is something kind of in my background because people with BPD, I mean, ADHD and BPD are often go hand in hand because there's a lot of shared characteristics of the two. Like for instance, impulsivity, a huge one. Feelings of low self-worth, also a big one. So people with ADHD, their impulsivity, the way we would work on it if you had BPD is we would break it down and it would be called like chaining the behavior. So it's like, okay, so your motivation dropped. So then you impulsively took 10 shots of espresso, right? But then that caused you to have a panic attack. And then that panic attack led you to feeling bad about your mental health. And then you took a 3-hour bath and got none of your work done. Is that correct? Like that's the chain, right?
Yeah.
And so if like you break that down, it's like, oh, like this whole chain started because I impulsively responded to something that's just naturally occurring in my brain.
Wow.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I see what you mean. Because with BPD, there's a whole lot of impulsivity in there too, and so you're using that with relationship. But with ADHD, it's more tied to just this network of like your, I guess, just patterns, right? Like you're impulsively, God bless you, you're sort of impulsively just jumping into things. So yeah, I guess when you're working with those two worlds, I mean, how do you see those two combined? Like with ADHD, BPD, what do you notice with all that, or any other things or thoughts about that?
I just think they kind of like compound against each other, like they exacerbate each other because someone with BPD already has a difficult time maintaining relationships. They're often emotionally dysregulated. They often have fears of abandonment. They often are sensitive to rejection, and so it's like not only did a more predominantly an environmental kind of impact on your sense of self is messing with you, but also your brain chemistry and your biology is also holding you down in a way where you have to navigate two things now. And so it's weird how much crossover there is between the two. I think the origin of where they come from is slightly different.
Yeah.
But they have a similar smell to them.
Yeah, I could totally see that. Whereas I guess BPD would be there's a bit more relationally being the center focus, right? With ADHD is more of the neurological part, but
yeah,
that's super fascinating.
But the way it like comes out is kind of similar. And I think someone with ADHD, their relationship conflict on average is probably less than someone with BPD. But still, there's a relationship conflict with both.
Yeah.
And I don't know why, but I was like thinking they have a similar smell, and then in my head I'm like, what? I wonder what smell it would be. And then randomly my brain just went cantaloupe.
It sounds like ADHD to me.
Maybe I didn't miss the bullet. Maybe it nicked me like right there.
Maybe you got some ADHD.
That is kind of how my therapy sessions go. It's
I
like
love that.
rapidly changing conversation.
I mean, that's kind of good though, right? Like present focus. You don't need to have like a perfect agenda, and that's part of the healing that comes from both. Like the healing process for BPD and ADHD looks like a good practice of mindfulness and present focused awareness. And I think that's really good, especially with ADHD, because with ADHD, if you don't have pockets of mindfulness practice, then you're kind of missing out on a lot of the benefits that you could had you strategized more. So a really good way to work with ADHD is to practice mindfulness and organizing your habits. Because with ADHD, you go underground for long periods of time, much longer than other people, doing things that's kind of been already set in motion that feel routine. So you might start off a day at 7 a.m. and kind of go on autopilot until 12 p.m., have lunch, and then go on autopilot again until like 6 p.m. And you don't even realize it, but you're going to the same lunch spot every single day because it's part of your routine. So while that can feel sort of like numbing and discouraging that you go underground for long periods of times, you can use that to your advantage. If you plan ahead and set up good habits, you might not even notice the difference as much, and yet you're doing things that feel hard to other people.
Mm-hmm.
Just as much as you can set yourself up for a bad day, go underground and come back up, and it was the same level of difficulty doing it in willpower, and yet you had a less good day.
And what you're getting at too is like people with ADHD, they need cues. They need visual cues. They need auditory cues. So if you're making tea and you have a history of ADHD and you've noticed that many times you let it steep for an hour because you left it there, get a timer and put that timer on and let it ring. And I think that's the biggest thing, like beyond the phrase get organized, as in terms of like a solution to navigate your ADHD better, getting organized is an incomplete sentence. You have to get organized with the grain of your thinking. So if you try to be organized in a way that someone without ADHD is organized, you're just going to feel awful. But if you try to get organized in a way that works with the grain of your mind, then you're not going to maybe expect yourself to fold all your clothing because that's too overwhelming for you. But maybe you just have a bin system. We have a bin system. But maybe you have a bin system. Maybe you have a timer when you're making your tea. Maybe you realize that you get caught in a tunnel at work and every hour you need an alarm to go off to remind you, like, hey, get up and walk around for a second. Like, don't rely on a non-ADHD person's brain when, in terms of the features of someone with non-ADHD, when you have ADHD, like, you're not going to remember. Don't ask yourself to remember. Work around it.
Yeah, I love that, going with the grain. Because with ADHD, you want to set up good cues in your environment, and you want to set it up so that way you do have some control. Versus like for example, I walked into my house today and I had like 5 things on my list that I needed to do house-wise.
Mm-hmm.
So would I have 2 choices, and I usually choose the first choice. You just walk in and you just kind of go in blind. You just start working on stuff. You're like cleaning the sink, and then you notice the stain on the oven, and then you wipe that and you don't finish the sink work. And then while you're wiping the oven, you're like, oh, wait a minute, I realized I was supposed to turn on the washing machine. Oh, wait, I didn't turn on the dishwasher because, so I have to do these dishes now because the dishwasher's not done. And so a good way to handle ADHD is strategize. What I did was I got a notepad and I wrote down, today was the first time I actually did this.
Yeah.
It's so interesting that it coincided with today's podcast. But I wrote down, do laundry, open the dishwasher and clean it, and then do the hand dishes.
Mm-hmm.
And I would never have done it in that order had I not written that down.
Well, what you're getting at is people with ADHD have a very difficult time sequencing events. Like A leads to B leads to C. Did you ever do neuropsych testing?
No.
Oh, that's really?
On myself?
No, like as part of your PhD program,
Oh,
they forced.
we learned about it.
They forced you. I had to do it like quite a bit. So
I
like,
see. I thought you asked if I received a neuropsych.
No. What's wrong with you? No, like IQ testing, like
Yeah.
testing for dementia, all that stuff. I had to do a lot of that in my program, even though I didn't like it. And part of neuropsych testing is like this test takes 20 minutes, but there's a 10-minute break, and you should probably fit in this one in that 10-minute break. So a lot of it is like sequencing, like which test do you give them when, and how do you navigate like A to leads to B. And so sequencing of events with someone with ADHD is gonna be fucking hard as hell, especially in neuropsych testing, but just in reality. And like one more thought, I'm just like gonna vomit up thoughts. The making a list is a really good idea, but I also think something to add to that is there are moments when someone with ADHD feels super overwhelmed. And when we're feeling super overwhelmed, it's important not to ask our mind to try and handle it the way we would handle it if we weren't overwhelmed. Like, if you're overwhelmed, don't expect yourself to figure out which restaurant you're going to go to, because at that point, you're past the ability to make that kind of decision. So instead, create like a note in your notes app of like, okay, here are 5 restaurants we like. And the only mental load that I really have to lift in this moment when I'm feeling overwhelmed and we want to eat is go to the notes app, as opposed to generate a list. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you have to make these little shortcuts for yourself. And that could also apply to like when I'm feeling bored. And normally when I feel bored, I do a behavior I don't want to do. Let's have a list of things that I can refer to in that moment so I don't have to think of them. So like number one, like play a video game. Number two, take a bath. Number three, go and exercise, but have it written out, because part of navigating ADHD is also recognizing that when you're super overwhelmed, your ability to generate ideas is totally, fucked.
Right. And I mean, that's perfectly said with, procrastination. Because if you have this overwhelm feeling, then you're not going to want to do it now. You're going to want to either do it poorly now or avoid it until it builds up later. And so if you have ADHD, it's very likely that you're going to be very overwhelmed by a task. So what you need to do is make your task very simple. Like you're saying, you have to like you might want to put off an email to send to someone because you're like, I don't know how they'll respond. And maybe I missed a detail. And maybe I don't know what the social norm is here. So I don't want to do this today. Well, hey, here's what you do. Draft the email and don't send it. That's your to-do list item. And if you can sequence your behaviors in that way, now you're setting yourself up so that you have an automatic response to your environment. You don't have to do the hard thing yet. You can do a bit of it so that next time, if you feel like the deadline's coming up, all you have to do is press that send button and know that you put your best effort into it. That's the procrastination piece that's really hard to be with ADHD, but you can short circuit it that way a bit.
For sure. And it's like when you're overwhelmed or you don't know how to navigate this moment because your ADHD is impacting you more than the average moment, it's important to pay attention to the habit of leaning on these compensating behaviors. Like if you're super overwhelmed and you have to send an email and it has to go out, you're probably going to be rereading it 50 times.
Yeah.
And catching yourself and going, you know what? This isn't a bad behavior. It's good to reread this because it catches things, but there is a limit to pressing that button where any more button presses, any more rereads of this same email is only going to make you feel more anxious. There's an inflection point, and you have to get good at knowing where that inflection point is and letting go of that compensating behavior when it's not working for you anymore.
Yeah, and this is something that people with avoidant attachment need to hear, because avoidant attachers with ADHD are most likely to overcompensate with over preparation, even more so than other people with ADHD. Because they're the ones that are going to write down an email 100 times. They're the ones who's going to memorize the parking structure because they don't want to appear in a state of not having control. So you have to find that inflection point like you're talking about. Like you have to at some point expose yourself to your environment, because it is a cognitive distortion that you have to have absolute control before you enter your environment. It's true, though, that you do have evidence that your mind has, in a sense, sort of not given you some of the same resources and data points that other people have. So you might at times want to do a little bit more, but you also don't want to overcompensate to the point where it's your default for the sake of control. You want to approach it in a state of acceptance. I'm going to go into this space and I'm not going to have everything prepared. And hey, some people might actually find it endearing that you're vulnerable, that you are what you are. You don't have to show up and look neurotypical everywhere you go.
I totally agree. Like if you're rereading an email 100 times, right, you can validate that the rereading component is a good tool. And you can also recognize the moment that tool starts to drive your car. Yeah. And the second it feels like you're now a passenger to that tool is the second you need to kind of interrupt it.
That's good. It's not a tool for you. The tool starts to control you, and now you're trapped into.
And you're trapped in this like survival mode that you don't need to be in because you're not driving the car anymore. You're in fight or flight. The second you're rereading it for the 10th time, you're in fight or flight.
Yep. And like if you're in fight or flight, you need a script. Like that's the thing with avoidant attachment. If you have ADHD and avoidant attachment, your life starts to turn into like a script, and now everybody in your world is slowly accepting you and clapping you for your performance. And no wonder you come to therapy later and you say, well, I'm not getting any joy out of life. And it's like, well, yeah, because you're living life as if it's a gigantic test that you have to pass, that you need extra test taking time to complete.
Yeah.
But in reality, if you enjoy the aspects of your shortcomings, perceived shortcomings, then you're going to find places of acceptance that you didn't even know were there. Because with ADHD, you overcompensate by ignoring some pockets of reality that are there. So of course, you're going to ignore the pockets of your own ADHD diagnosis that are actually endearing and acceptable to the people around you. And at the end of the day, like, some people are going to be turned off by some of the things that are ADHD about you because you're different. And who's to say that they're right and you're wrong?
I am there to say.
Vinny's going to say it.
I will deem you right or wrong. No, but similarly, like, I can imagine. You tell me if this rings true for your
Sure,
personal
sure.
experience. I can imagine when you start a job that you are really putting. And I can imagine someone that's starting a job with ADHD, and they really want to put in like a good first impression. They're gonna really amp up their performance in such a way where once they've fully integrated into that job, now they're just an employee and they're not new. They have this imposter syndrome because the way they presented themselves in the beginning is so counter to their actual day-to-day experience, and they can't keep it up. It's kind of like someone who's constantly running from being discovered as, I made up my resume. It's like I made up my motivation and now I can't sustain it. And you're afraid of being discovered by your employer.
Well, I would say it actually kind of depends on the job, because with ADHD, you do feel a strong sense of imposter syndrome, especially when you start a job. But it's because either, like, let's say it's a job that you know that you're like really freaking good at. Your biggest fear when you start the job is this anxiety crippling fear that my ADHD is going to screw me up at the beginning and nobody's ever going to get to see my talent in this area. So you feel extreme fear. You're like, wait a minute, I need to memorize the onboarding task. I need to make sure I email everybody perfectly and on time. And you think about it, you read your emails for the interview acceptance letter, everything. You read it a million times because you know how good you can be. And then when you finally do have the job and you're there and you're finally living it out, it's like this gasp of like, oh my gosh, finally.
I can imagine you being like to your own ADHD, like, don't fuck this up, ADHD.
Exactly, yeah. But then also you're right, though. There's other positions, though, where you're like, if you do approach and you don't feel like you can actually do it and you overcompensate in all those ways, you can totally feel that imposter syndrome. I just have never been ballsy enough to try that.
Also, we have such a bizarre job. Like, I'm so lucky that we live in a universe where this job even exists.
Right.
But like, we don't live in reality in terms of our day-to-day life. Like, where we have the weirdest job on earth.
We're like self-care. Most people.
Yeah. But I have a question for you that's kind of leaning in towards the last segment we wanted to talk about.
Oh, yeah, the questions part.
I have one question, so I'm going to ask it first.
Okay,
Because
gotcha.
then I've got nothing.
I got 10 questions.
My one question, which I think you are a perfect person to ask, is what depictions of ADHD do you feel like are not very accurate?
Oh, that's a great question. I think it's sort of the depiction of the ADHD person like a squirrel that gets distracted by like, oh, wait, what's that? What's this? What's this?
Mm-hmm.
Where in reality, I think that's very flawed, because with ADHD, it's not so much you're like, oh, what's that piece of candy? What's that piece of candy? Or you're not like a goldfish, but more so you are very passionate about something that's more singular. Like it doesn't have to necessarily be the same thing for every person with ADHD. So you're not like a squirrel, but more so you're hyper-focused. I would say the other maybe misconception or the other idea about ADHD that can be bothersome is, of course, like, oh, you're lazy and you don't care. I think people who are friends or know someone with ADHD, or maybe you don't know they have ADHD, but it'd be nice if you knew, because there's probably a lot of situations where they're doing something that's bothering you and you think they're doing it on purpose, but they just have no idea. And they really just need that feedback. And hopefully they're at a stage of development, the person with ADHD, where they can receive that feedback. Because with ADHD, sometimes you can have a strong ego defense around criticism, because you're constantly criticizing yourself. And if you don't ignore some of those criticisms, then you can't really survive a whole lot from the shame if you're more shame prone.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say those two things, and that's all I got so far.
No, those are good. I feel like those are probably the two biggest ones.
Yeah. Let me ask you a couple of questions that we have. So we got caught up here, but we do have a few questions that people asked from Instagram. that we want to give space for. So people, please ask us questions. We listen, and sometimes we almost forget to do it at the end because of the time and we get so passionate, but
We've got
we
10
do
minutes.
have time. Yeah. And they said we could go until 2:10, so we got some
cool.
time. So one of the questions, this is a good one. If you have ADHD and you don't have a whole lot of dopamine while trying to complete a task, how do you get motivation? How do you take on tasks even if you don't have dopamine to do it and you're required to do it?
You manufacture the motivation by creating like explicit rewards for, like, let's say you have to study for an exam that's 3 days away and you need to study 2 hours today, but you don't have the motivation. Well, okay, break that down in 30-minute increments. After 30 minutes, have something that is enjoyable that you reward yourself with. So now there's a shorter period of time that you have to sustain your attention. There is a carrot at the end of a stick that is attainable. And now all of a sudden you've manufactured a motivation rather than kind of hoping it appears out of nowhere.
Oh, I like that a lot. And I mean, that's wrapped up, I think, in a tool, CBT SMART goals, right? Like, you want to be very specific. You want it to be measurable. But I really like this. With ADHD, you can't make your goal small enough. So like if you have to write a paper, don't write paper on your to-do list, but more so put open Word doc and come up with a title. Or even just set yourself up so that you sit with it for a bit and start it. But it's not the whole task at once. The more specific you can get, maybe the better with those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree.
Yeah. Anything else with that one?
Well, I think my biggest gripe about motivation as a concept is that people think it's this thing that inhabits you out of nowhere. Like, oh, I'm just waiting for motivation to strike. It's like, well, good luck.
Yeah.
You're going to be waiting a while, and you're going to be also completely out of control because you're not deciding when it appears. I mean, you can create an environment where you're more likely to be motivated, like getting good sleep might be helpful. But at the end of the day, it's not your decision whether or not you're motivated. So using that as the fuel towards your productivity is always going to be a mistaken thinking. And I would argue that it's probably your ego that's convincing you to wait for motivation so that you can avoid actually taking a step in the right direction. So I would say there's a great book by Stephen Pressfield called The War of Art. The War of Art, it's a play on words of the art of war. And he basically says, like, hey, if you want to like make something and create something, stop waiting for inspiration to strike and start doing. You know, like one of my comedy idols, George Carlin, was notorious for sitting down for 4 to 8 hours a day and just writing. Wow. And not a lot of that ever made it to the stage, but it's more about recognizing that you're more of a hose that's just like vomiting things out, and maybe 1% of that is going to be useful, but that doesn't necessarily indicate the 99% is reflective of your artistic ability.
Right.
It's just the process. You have to allow the process to happen.
Right. I love all you said. And I would add that if you have ADHD and you're missing motivation and you're really having to sit down with something for a long time, go to a coffee shop. Mm-hmm. Not just to get coffee to, give your system the Adderall it needs or whatever. The stimulants.
Yeah.
But if you have ADHD and you have no motivation, a coffee shop or some place that's public is perfect, because with ADHD, you're tempted to shift your attention to something else. And then you're like, oh, I just want a sandwich, or I just want this, I want this. Make it so that your to-do list item is go to the coffee shop and get your favorite sandwich with a coffee, drink, eat, and then you're there for the next 2 hours. And it's like, it'd be ridiculous if you just went there for the next. If you just left immediately. So I would even just add that helps me a lot.
And I think that could be embedded in the motivation of like study for 30 minutes, and then your reward is going to the coffee shop and getting a coffee, eating a sandwich, and then that's your break, and then study for another 30 minutes there, like change your environment, keep things novel, you know?
I love that. Cool. Let's get a couple more in here. Ooh, wow, there's so many good ones. We already talked about anxious attachment and avoidant. Sure.
Let me pick one.
Okay. Yeah, you pick.
And the thing you
I'm
texted
biased.
me.
I'm just like overloaded right now. Like there's so many good ones.
I was really hoping for this to turn into a therapy session on you, but it just did not.
I felt like it kind of did a little. I got
It always
emotional.
does. I always try and squeeze it in.
I got emotional at some parts. I don't know if you could tell.
No, you tell me after this is over which parts.
Yeah.
ADHD, anxiety, and emotion dysregulation.
Ooh.
I feel like that's just like a big topic. Like
That is.
Or you know what's interesting? ADHD and autism. Let's talk about that.
Oh my
I was
gosh, that's
literally talking to the people in the coffee shop that I go to about this, and it just I'll edit my thoughts because I don't want to say it as
Yeah.
Let's talk about that. ADHD
Yeah.
and autism.
I actually don't know a ton about that, but at face value, what I would say is I guess the overlap between the two is like if it's combined, at least you have with ADHD hyperfocus, impulsivity, and all that, and then there's also difficulties like inhibiting like your social like reactions, and with autism, you don't really automatically like know the rules at an emotional level, and I think the difficult part with autism and ADHD is that with ADHD, you actually have the gift to rely on your impulses. And you're very intuitive when it comes to things because that's sort of been your guiding light. But if you mix that in with autism, now that guiding light is gone. And so if you rely on your impulses even more so, you're going to end up talking about a subject that's very not connecting to the people around you, and you don't have that same intuition. And so now you're dealing with both sides of the battle of having to learn more rules, and then there's more temptation maybe to overcompensate if you have that combination. But that's my go at it.
I think you're right on the money, and it makes me think of my research way back when is on facial expressions, right? Like, think about it. People with ADHD are rejection sensitive, which means they're probably really good at scanning faces and anticipating if someone's going to socially reject them, right? So that's a kind of a little bit of a superpower that they develop. The problem, though, is if you also have autism, inherent in that disorder is a deficit in social cognition. There's research on this. You're biologically less able to perceive facial expression changes. You know, there's part of your internal, like I forget the specific part of the brain, the fusiform gyrus. Anyway, it doesn't matter.
Thanks.
But like your ability to perceive facial expressions and really kind of pick up on social cues is impaired at the most fundamental level. And so not only are you sensitive to rejection, but you're also having a really hard time identifying it. So it kind of plays off of each other in not a great way. To switch to a different thing, because just like the combined presentations, I want to do another question.
Yeah.
This is the only other question someone asked me on my Instagram.
Okay.
Like some people have found that covert narcissists often use ADHD as a cover for their disorder. It's almost like an excuse that gives them an out so that you're not able to hold them accountable because, it's my ADHD flaring up, like it's IBS or something.
Yeah, that's a really good one. And it's interesting because my thoughts on it went the opposite direction, but we'll talk about that next. But if you're someone who has narcissism, you're narcissistic and you're using ADHD to play on that makes perfect sense. Like you could easily do that. I mean, and it's scary because how do you differentiate that? So if to answer, I mean, what was the question?
So it was more just like, have you
Kind of just a topic.
Can
right?
you see someone with kind of a narcissistic presentation use ADHD to avoid accountability in some way?
Oh yeah, all the time because they're looking for anything to grab onto to avoid accountability, right? And that's their literal coping mechanism. So if they see the word ADHD and empathy, they're like, oh, let me show that to the world. Like that's what they'll do, right? What do you think?
Well, I think what they use too is like what we were saying earlier. ADHD is such a hard thing to tangibly point to. Like the way ADHD is felt in a person is so invisible in a lot of ways and can be very hidden that someone with narcissism might use that immateriality as a cover. Like, oh, I have it, but you can, of course you can't see it, but of course it's there. You know, like they use it as the lack of tangible symptoms sometimes is the way they hide behind it.
Wow. And it's such a good cover. I was thinking actually the opposite direction. I was thinking about people with anxious attachment. No, I guess we've been going
I
at
was
it for
going
a
to
while.
encourage you to just go down that road immediately because I was
Yeah.
more interested in that. But
I went to your
go
road.
wherever your brain goes. Come
Yeah.
on.
You're right. So if you have ADHD, it's very likely that you might get seen to be as a narcissist. Because if you have ADHD, it looks like narcissism sometimes because you're going on your impulses and things are more obstacle to you. Like you're extremely stimulated when it comes to something that's very passionate to you. And then that can operate with people as well. And so the moment that somebody stops stimulating you, you put them to the side and you're like, all right, well, what's next? And it's not true narcissism because that's something that you don't feel guilty about. Someone with ADHD, you're going to realize like, what have I done? The other side of ADHD that looks like narcissism, I think, is the lying. Like there's this impulsivity with ADHD that you might actually be tempted to lie, but also it's not actual lies. It's poor working memory. So someone could be asking you like, what you do the other day? And you're like, oh my gosh, it was awesome. I talked to Wendy and then we had a great drink together. And they're like, well, what was the name of the place that you went to? What was the street? What was it? And you're just like, I have no idea. And people are like, who doesn't pay attention to the name of the book that they're reading, you know? But with ADHD, you miss those details. And so I think people with ADHD get super anxious around those details and they look like they're telling a cover story. So I can see a couple of angles where people with ADHD get mixed up into looking like a narcissist or a liar sometimes when they might not be.
This is why you have to answer the question with your first instinct because that is the most, honestly, I'm going to go home and watch this to clip it up for our TikToks and stuff.
Good.
And I'm going to post you talking on my profile, and I'm not even going to ask your permission because that was
just
so
do it.
good.
Wow.
That makes so much sense. Like the obstacle thing, like there is a almost appearance of self-absorption, but it's not in a personality disordered way.
Right, exactly. And then you're going to start feeling like, oh, people are watching you. You're not taking care of these responsibilities because you don't have to. Other people are coming to your rescue. And it's like with narcissism, you're like, heck yeah, I'm going to enjoy that. With
I'm going to
ADHD,
make you come to my rescue.
Exactly. But with ADHD, it's more so, oh my gosh, I didn't even realize it. It's an absence of awareness that's leading to the cycle. But there's also, it's easier to avoid coming aware of it because it feels good. Like you're not thinking about it, right?
It's
So
active versus passive.
Yes.
It's
yes.
like ADHD creates passive accommodation, whereas narcissism creates an active accommodation. Like I'm going to pull it out of you. Whereas with ADHD, it kind of gets pulled out passively.
Perfect. Yeah, 100%. And also, like you said, I also start to worry about selfishly taking over too much. So sometimes I will. So you did some therapy for me there.
How so?
By saying like, just go with your gut and what you want to talk about, you know?
I mean, I do that. I'm trying to model to you. I'm telling you an insensitive joke about anxiously attached, whatever. Just fucking.
You're right. All right. I'm meeting you now. Okay. How about, let's see. How do you deal with rejection sensitivity if you have ADHD?
That's a good question. I feel like rejection sensitivity at its core, if you look up the research on rejection sensitivity, because my dissertation was on understanding cognitive empathy and how that is influenced by emotion dysregulation, but my thesis was on rejection sensitivity. And if you look at the research, the most conclusive thing you will learn about rejection sensitivity is that people who are sensitive to rejection are more likely to look at neutral faces and assume they're being rejected. So like, for instance, a rejecting face looks a certain way, a neutral face looks a different way. Someone with rejection sensitivity is going to look at a rejecting face and more accurately than the average person identify rejection, right? So they're better in that sense. But the ways in which they're not better is they'll be shown a neutral face with nothing on and go, that person's rejecting, right? And so that's where you go too far, and that's where your life can get really impacted, is your bias is kind of skewed in one direction. So maybe you're kind of like a COVID test. Like, you're going to catch all of the positive ones, but you're going to get some negative tests as false positives too. And that might really impact your life. Like, you might feel rejected by someone who actually really wants to be around you, and the relationship is gone before you know it.
Yeah.
So you have to understand, if your instrument is biased in one direction, you kind of have to recalibrate it by going a little bit the other way.
Yeah. And this is huge too with rejection sensitivity, because with ADHD, you wear your expressions on your face. It's hard to suppress them, and you can be impulsive. But I know a lot of people with ADHD that are like robots because they're so inhibited, because they hate that their facial expressions give them away. So one of the reasons that people with ADHD have high levels of rejection sensitivity is because they know that if they are in a social situation and there's someone saying something that they don't like, or who knows what, they will inhibit their facial expressions repeatedly to make sure that they're not expressing or exuding rejection, because they know how easily they can pick up rejection. So what happens when you're studying someone's face and they're talking to you and you pick up one tiny bit of information that could say that they're rejecting you, even if their face is not saying it, you over-assume that they're rejecting you because you know that you would inhibit your facial expressions as well.
Mm-hmm.
So now you're relying on false information to determine that, and you have a whole lot of experiences in which you were a child and you expressed yourself immediately, impulsively, and you were rejected because of that. Like, hey, are you okay? You look nervous. Like, that's the worst thing you can say to someone with ADHD, because you're like, oh no, I thought I suppressed that. I thought that I was able to prevent myself from revealing like what's happening in here, right?
And you get almost, it starts off a more conscious decision to hit the restrict behavior impulse, right? Like the inhibition impulse. You hit the button and you pull it back, right? But over time, it becomes so conditioned that you're no longer driving that car, and the inhibition is pulling you from revealing your authentic self in a way that is going to be fine. And the problem with that is, there's this, I think it's Carl Jung, there's this great line. It's like, a child becomes socialized when they do something wrong, and before the parent can punish them, the child goes, oh, don't worry, Dad, I'll punish myself. You internalize the punishment. You internalize the restriction of your behavior. But the problem is when you do that too much, you almost create a prison of your own experience, and you can never really escape that, because the safety is so powerful that you'd rather feel safe than vulnerable, because that's too dangerous.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah. You stop participating.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Honestly, I think that's probably a good place to.
Yeah, I think we're kind of
maybe we could. I don't know. You got any last thoughts or any other last questions you wanna do one more, or what?
If you had to decide between murdering 100 puppies, you have to answer this, or two 70-year-old people. 100 puppies, two 70-year-olds.
How much time do I have to decide?
10 seconds.
And I have to choose one.
Uh-huh. Tilby's going to hate me for this.
I gotta go with the puppies, man.
You're going to kill the puppies?
I mean, don't say it like that.
I mean, you guys hear it first. He's a puppy killer. Those 70-year-olds lived very fulfilled lives. And actually, I forgot to tell you, they had terminal illnesses and they were going to die that week.
Wow. That. All right, you got to choose before the episode is over.
I'm saving the puppies.
Wow. Okay. Well, you know which therapist to pick now. If you thought the first choice was the right one,
the puppies were rescues. How could you kill rescue puppies?
You left out that information intentionally, you psychopath. Well, if you guys have more topics for us to cover, I mean, shoot us a message. ADHD was the topic that you guys asked for, so we did it. So we're people of our word.
Yes.
You know, we do what we do. And Vinny doesn't like humans. He likes puppies over
yeah, look, I have a standard poodle tattooed right there. Well, until next time.
Until next time, peace.
Thank you.
Man, that was cool.